So, hello everyone, my name's Chloe, and I'll let Linda introduce yourself as well. You can come up first.
Okay. Yeah, hi, I'm Linda. I'm a clinical psychologist working in London at Queen Square at the neuromuscular clinic down there. I work with adults with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and I've been there just over a year. And before that, I've worked with adults with other physical health problems, amputees, and people who've had brain injuries and strokes.
And yes, so I'm also a clinical psychologist, except I work with young people and families. So I'm based up in the John Walton Centre up in Newcastle. So again, like Linda, joined the team last year, so the neuromuscular world was quite new to me. However, I work a lot with young people with cancer and neurological conditions. So today, I suppose just off in the background, just giving a bit of an overview around psychosocial care, what we mean by self-esteem and self-confidence. So this is, sometimes we describe it as a bit of a fluffy topic because it might mean slightly different things for everyone. So Linda and I will talk about what we think it means to us, but people might have slightly different interpretations of it. We'll have a think about what do we mean when we think about healthy self-esteem and maybe poor self-esteem. Think about that across the lifespan as well. So we've got a variety of different ages here, a lot of different people attending the conference. So what it might mean for someone who's 15 versus 26 is going to be very, very different. Some strategies to try out. Again, everything is quite individual. So it's just kind of picking and mixing what might work for you, and then also external support, because we know that sometimes we can do things by ourselves, but we might need a bit of extra help from other people. So we know in general about the importance of psychosocial care. So this is becoming, when we say psychosocial care, we're talking about mental health, social relationships, getting into school, work, etc. So it's a big, wide umbrella term. And basically it's within the standards of care, the international ones. There's a more recent project that's happening. This is where Linda and I kind of come in, where there's a 3-year project around psychosocial needs for young people, families, adults with Duchenne. You'll see a picture. This was actually last year's Action Duchenne conference where we finally got to meet each other in person. But that's kind of where it kind of came about, our roles of trying to create some guidelines around psychosocial care and just get to know families and hear from parents and young people and adults of what is important to them and what's not working at the moment. I think that's for yourself.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. So I guess first of all we thought we'd just touch on why we are talking about self-esteem and self-confidence. We were invited to talk on this topic, and I guess that just reflects from Action Duchenne and people that they've been speaking to, that this is a topic that's become sort of more important. And I think just this week, Pathfinders have published a fantastic report based on their research. Picture of it there, entering adulthood with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and I think that it was one of the most common aspects in there that people said that they'd like to change about themselves was confidence. So I think it's very timely, and I think this is based on why we're talking about this today. And people commented on, but they want to be more confident in talking and interacting with others. We've been looking to see what sort of research is out there already about self-esteem in Duchenne and other muscular dystrophies, and there really hasn't been much published. So I guess the scope of what we're talking about today is thinking about self-esteem just generally, because we are all, have to develop our own sort of self-esteem. But looking at other research with people who've had other physical disabilities, there was something around in adolescents especially, that they can feel there's more sort of stigma from their peers related to their physical disabilities. And this can lead to change in their self-concept, their self-image, and lead to sort of difficulties with interactions, social anxiety, and that we know that can have an effect on self-esteem. But saying that, there have been other studies as well, again, just thinking more generally about people with physical disabilities, that have compared groups of people who have disabilities and those who don't have physical disabilities, and levels of self-esteem are on a par. So there's there's no one specific thing related to the physical disability. I've gone backwards. So definition-wise, I think they'll probably find lots of definitions, but one, I guess what we're thinking about when we're talking about self-esteem is about how people are valuing themselves, so what your opinion is of yourself, your sort of perception of yourself. So it's not about comparing to other people, it's just how your self-worth, how you feel about yourself. Whereas confidence, I guess we consider it thinking more about your abilities, your capabilities. And so this can be, some people might think about a particular situation or task that I'm not confident in, whereas other people might think more generally that I just don't feel confident, just describe themselves as an unconfident person. But generally, I guess confidence can change in situations. So somebody that I've been working with, or something that I probably commonly hear, is people who are saying that they feel unconfident in having conversations with strangers, or people down when they go into the shops. But actually, they're quite happy having a conversation and feel more free-flowing when they're talking with people that they know, so whether that's carers or family members. So, it's not being unconfident in talking, it's not a difficulty in having the conversations, it's just the situation. And I think really this presentation, even though it's talking about self-confidence and self-esteem, we know that they're very closely interlinked, so that and the closely related concepts, that people who have low self-esteem are more likely to have low confidence and vice versa. And so this is just really thinking about how self-confidence fits into more the global picture of mental health and well-being. We've got the three overlapping circles, just reflecting sort of what we call a biopsychosocial approach. So the biological can be sort of the genetics, physical health, and obviously as health professionals working with people in physical health settings, this is something that we always take into consideration as well. And then the social and the psychological. So there's a all these three factors interlinking. And the importance in a way of putting this up, I think, is just highlighting that, self-confidence is just one of those factors, and self-esteem and confidence are just one of those factors. Many different factors can impact on our mental health and well-being. Thinking socially, thinking about the environment that people are in, or is the environment adapted to their needs? Thinking about peers and peer relationships, but also psychologically thinking about the individual and their own individual coping skills that they've developed. So there are many other factors really that we can address to help and enhance somebody's well-being. Oh, and just to say, so I guess a key thing for us as well as psychologists is thinking, so we probably wouldn't see somebody who's referred for problems with self-esteem as such, but what can happen is that if people do have sort of more poor or low self-esteem, we know that is linked potentially with further problems. So if they're not having the support to feel better about themselves, to value themselves, it can lead or be associated with depression, anxiety and stress. And this is just a quote that I found because I thought it really helped link about how self-esteem and self-confidence, the importance of it for enabling people to live sort of fulfilling, enjoyable lives. So a healthy amount of self-esteem is necessary to have the confidence to meet life's challenges. Because we're all going to have some challenges. So some people will have more challenges than others. And to be able to participate in things that you find rewarding and enjoyable. So this is just, I guess, a bit of a snapshot of what we think about when we're thinking about healthy or, good self-esteem. I guess it's associated with feeling happy, feeling, optimism, pleasure. If somebody has good self-esteem, they'll have that good self-reliance. They believe in themselves. And again, it's this is from general literature in a way on self-esteem. If you have confidence in yourself and respect yourself, then it's likely that others will respect you as well. On the right-hand side, just the areas there, I guess these are some examples of what it might look like if somebody has sort of that healthy level of self-esteem. So I guess if they're faced with sort of difficult situations, stressful situations, they're probably more likely to use what we call healthy coping strategies. So these might be more things like problem solving, finding ways to resolve the situation, the problem, rather than perhaps just avoiding or pretending this isn't happening. They may be more resilient. So, let's say we all sort of have some setbacks in our lives, but people who are more resilient have that way of sort of bouncing back. So they don't get so, in a way, so bogged down or perhaps dwell on the problem for so long. They're also willing to try new things. So people with healthy self-esteem are willing to try things, even if perhaps they've had mistakes in the past or might not have gone quite as they wanted to, but they sort of have that courage to be able to try things again. And the positive inner voice, I guess, we all have this rolling sort of conversation in our minds that we're talking to ourselves. And once we start noticing that, that's when we maybe can change things. But so a positive inner voice might be sort of that more encouraging myself to do things if on, another occasion it hasn't quite gone as well as I'd like it to have done. And then assertiveness, that's really kind of key and really quite important, I guess, for our men and boys with, well, all of us, but especially with Duchenne, sort of that learning to be able to express your needs and ask for help when you need help. And then on the other hand, a bit of a snapshot about what poor or low self-esteem may look like. As I said before, we know it can link with depression and feeling insecure. The inner critic, you probably hear us talking a bit about that, because I think that's something that we really know that there's a very much a direct link between how we talk to ourselves and our level of self-esteem. So if we're constantly sort of criticising ourselves or expecting that I'm going to fail at this, it can make us more discouraged, like easily discouraged to try things again in future. Because if I'm already sort of predicting that this isn't going to go well, I'm not going to be able to manage this. And just, really tricky that if people are experiencing low self-esteem as well, and they feel that, maybe if they're being less assertive, and that other people are making those decisions for them, or other people are choosing things for them, then that can contribute to people feeling perhaps more out of control or unimportant. And again, just some of the I guess, examples of how people with poor self-esteem, they may be seen by others, or some of the factors that we may see in them. Again, that critical, overly self-critical. And Chloe's going to talk a little bit more about where some of these things may have developed from. But I guess it may be critical to ourselves, but also, have that... I might criticise myself, but it can contribute to people sort of perhaps avoiding or not wanting to experience going into similar situations in future. And dwelling on mistakes as well, rather than being able to sort of let things, think actually we all make mistakes. I don't imagine there's anyone in this room who could say that I've never made a mistake before in my life. Because that's part of what we do. We're human, so we do make mistakes. But I guess it's then what do we do with that? Can we learn from something rather than dwelling on it and it becoming sort of a bigger issue? Okay, so I'm going to hand over.
So then we start thinking about, okay, where does our self-esteem come from? How do we grow in confidence? So if we think of it, it comes through our life experiences and our interactions with other people, okay? So we learn from other people, like Linda was saying, we then kind of take in some of those experiences and we make sense of them. And that can be in a positive way, or it can, we can learn something from it, or it might teach us, actually, I'm never going to do that again. That was a really bad idea, okay? So we're not born with it. It's something that we develop. And our childhood experiences do play an important role from this, okay? As well as that, it's the people around us that can also help support self-esteem and confidence. So this applies for everyone. This isn't a Duchenne-specific topic. This is, who we have around us and our support systems are going to impact how we feel about ourselves and also how confident we are. So the good news is self-esteem can be strengthened at any point across your lifespan, okay? The not so good news is it can also be eroded. And that's when we kind of think about development and as we get older and the experiences we have, how it can kind of pick us up, but also we can kind of get knocked back a little bit as well. So if we think about, this is just a more general, our lifespan, okay? We pick these categories. These are sometimes used. You see it in the research of like, here's what we think is going to happen. These aren't fixed categories. These are just a bit of a loose thing for us to kind of think about different ages of what might crop up, okay? So we've got very, very early life, early childhood, teenage years, and then adulthood, okay? So if we think about our development of the different life stages that we go through, okay? When we have a physical health condition, this is going to impact our development in some ways, okay? So we're either going to have additional challenges or barriers that we're going to have to overcome, okay? So if we think of it from a self-esteem, self-confidence point of view, that in some ways can increase things like resilience, which we know is very good for self-esteem and confidence, but also it can chip away at certain things as well, okay? So as we progress, we will face the same challenges as other people, but there might just be some extra things that kind of crop up that we need to come and discuss with other people as well, if that makes sense. So when we think about very, very early life, this is just a very basic one, won't spend a lot of time on this. When you're a little baby, it's about safety. It's about getting fed, getting your needs met, staying warm, and building those relationships with your parents or caregivers, okay? So that's the initial bit where you get your safety from other people, all right? We don't know because we can't really test it, but we don't know how much babies think about, self-esteem and confidence. But if you think of it, if you have a very happy, chatty 18-month-old toddler kind of age wandering about, they're learning about life. They're testing things out, okay? They're probably, starting to walk as well, falling over, getting back up, all those kind of things where you're starting to get those very early life experiences. And how adults react to you at that point is also going to start slowly coming into your idea of like how confident you are trying new things. When we think about early childhood, so we've got the idea of, again, developmental milestones, so things like starting to walk, starting to talk, that's going to look different for different people. Some people might start a bit later, some people might start very, very quickly and be very chatty. But other skills like dressing yourself, okay? So they're the real practical things of this is what we start doing around, this is what we would expect in these milestones. The fun bit is when you start nursery and school, because that's when you really start widening your social network and getting more experience of other people. So instead of it just being usually family, you start, you've got other people your own age, you've got teachers, new adults, etc. So you're starting to experience a lot of different things. Some of it will probably feel quite safe and nice, and other things might be a little bit scary. So you'll all have experiences of like, say, a school day of the first day of school. Some young people might be in absolute tears. Some parents might be in tears. But then you get other young kids who are like, "Bye, see ya," and that's it. They're just gone and they start off at school. If you think about from a learning point of view, then as well, we know that around the age of 3 or 4. Children do start noticing differences in other people, okay? So again, you might have seen examples of, say if you're in a shop and if anyone knows like little kids and they will stare at something that looks a bit different. They're like, "Oh, what's that?" And they might say it out loud and it might be a bit embarrassing, but it's around that age that people will start noticing differences. And they might just be curious, so they're not trying to be mean. They might just start asking questions about, okay, why is that person doing such and such? You'll also start seeing self-related emotions starting to develop, okay? So that idea of like, oh yeah, I'm a really good brother, or I'm a really good sister, or I'm quite good at this, or I'm a bit rubbish at that. So they'll start getting a bit of an idea of what it is that they can and can't do, okay? So if we think of it from a self-esteem, self-confidence, this is where you're really starting to get those initial building blocks of how that young person might then go on and start talking about themselves, not just to the parents, but like just that inner voice that Linda was talking about of how you actually talk about yourself when you think about what it is that you can and can't do. And then a super important bit, and again, this comes across all ages as well, it's the people around you, so parents, caregivers, how you model things like self-esteem and confidence. So how you talk about yourself out loud, or how you respond when, say, something is tricky, how you respond to that as well. Do you become frustrated at stuff? Do you kind of think about actually, are we going to problem solve this together? So it's how you respond as an adult in a situation as well, but also thinking about what your capacity is at this stage. Because if we think about, Duchenne, for a lot of people in this room, and a lot of individuals in this room, this is probably when you got the diagnosis of Duchenne, okay? So life is going to look different for you than other people who might be going to school or other people in your friendship groups, etc. All right? So it's kind of noticing your ability to model things like self-confidence and your own self-esteem might differ because now you've got a big physical health condition that's now taken part in your life as well that you're going to have to adjust to a little bit, okay? So then when we think about middle kind of childhood, so around the ages of 7 or 11, okay, again, we're starting to not just notice other people are different, we might start notice that we're different from other people. So we start noticing the things that we might be good at. We might start noticing what we look like a bit more, so our appearance, okay? So things like, oh, I'm really, really good at PE because I'm class at football, but I can't catch a ball to save my life, something like that, okay? But also, from a school point of view, I'm really good at maths, but I'm a bit bad at English. But my friend Lucy or, Brian, he's really good at maths, and I'm like maybe not as good as Brian at doing it. So it's kind of, again, how we start talking about our skills and what we're able to do. And that really comes into play with things like being in the classroom, who we spend time with, from a peer point of view, because you really do start kind of talking to yourself a bit more at this stage. It's really hard to think when you're thinking back on it, like, I don't know if anyone remembers being 10 or 11 of how you spoke to yourself, but basically it's how you view what you're able to do. And on top of that, again, Duchenne is going to play a role here, okay? So you're potentially going to have started steroids. Your ability to walk might be changing. You might not be as fast. So when we think of those self-critical evaluations and how we talk to ourselves, we've got extra barriers that are starting to come into play that are going to affect how we feel about ourselves, and how other people react to us is also going to impact how we feel about ourselves. And on top of that, other things like, you're physically going to have to go to hospital more, you're going to be out of school, differences become more apparent here, and that can have an impact on how we feel. And then if we think around 11, it's also the time for, it's another big change. You're going to have to go to secondary school, okay? So then teenage years, enjoy. But again, if we think of it from any kind of teenager, the point of the teenage years is to fail, to try things out, to learn from it, to test boundaries, and, maybe disagree with your parents and caregivers a bit more. That move towards independence, okay? Again, if we think of it, social media, fantastic, but there's a big focus on appearance for a lot of young people. It's about establishing your sense of self. Who am I? What is it that I enjoy? What do I really like? Yes, I have to go to school, and yes, I go to the doctors, etc. But what is it that makes me me, okay? Peers, friendships, getting on with other people in your year. This is where you will, regardless, have fallouts with people. People will change. Friendship groups shift around. But again, if we are developing our self-esteem and self-confidence, we need to have a certain level of self-esteem and self-confidence to, first of all, be okay with changing friendship groups, because we have to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations to try and meet new people, okay? But again, it goes into that idea of who am I as a person, yeah? Sometimes that might not be super important for some people, but other times it's like, if this is getting in the way of me doing something, that's when we start thinking about self-esteem and confidence being poor or not working for us. Also, you start to fancy people when you're a teenager usually. You've gone through the primary school stage of like, ew, gross, boys, girls, to actually, starting to take a bit more of a notice here as well. And then overall, it is that move towards independence, autonomy, okay? So if we think of it from a medical point of view, or like coming into clinics and, you've got your physios and your doctors and loads of different professionals involved, it's kind of making that move towards, okay, right, you can answer some questions in clinic, okay? So yes, the doctors asked me as the parent to explain something, but actually, what do you think, Sam? You tell us what you think. So it's about kind of starting to have a bit more of a say in what's happening to you. And again, if we think about self-confidence and self-esteem, being able to do that, that's uncomfortable. Like sitting in a room when you've got like a line of professionals all asking you really personal questions, it's uncomfortable for anyone, okay? But again, if we think of it, for a lot of our young people with Duchenne and our adults with Duchenne, there's also increased neurodiversity, okay? I don't know if anyone was sitting next door and listening to James Poisky's talk around actually some of the communication stuff and getting your needs across can be more difficult anyway, okay? So it's about how do the people around you support you to get your message across, okay? Perfect example is it happens a lot in clinic where I have met a lot of young people who will come into the medical appointment, I think maybe we'll say 1 or 2 words in an hour. And then we will have a little bit of a separate session at different points during the week or do like different assessments and stuff like that. And we have the opposite problem where we get distracted and we talk a bit too much. So it's just, again, it's thinking of the setting of like, how do we get the best version of a young person across when there's all these extra challenges that crop up. And then adulthood. So in the traditional sense, if we think about adulthood, most people have a bit more of an idea of who am I as a person, okay? That does change, even, from when you're in your 18, 19, you might think you have an idea of who you are compared to when you're 30, 40, 50. So that idea of sense of self changes, okay? But you've got different roles. So there's things like going to college or having an apprenticeship or getting a job. So things that you're expected to do when you're an adult. And then developing relationships. So again, you're going to have a change from school and etc. of like, actually, how do I meet new people? It's sometimes quite easy to go in when you've got a set structure of school or even a workplace of being able to talk to individuals, but how do you actually make friends as an adult? So it's, again, if we think about self-esteem and self-confidence, you need to have a certain level of being okay with being uncomfortable to develop those skills, okay? And again, autonomy and independence, all right? But we're going to address the elephant in the room where actually, if we think of it physically, you're going to be more reliant on other people, okay? So that autonomy and independence, you're going to still want it, but it's going to look different if you have Duchenne, okay? And going back to what Linda said before around being assertive, of like being able to get your feelings and your decisions and what you want across is really, really linked into how comfortable you are with being able to communicate that with other people, okay? And I think, when we talk about factors that contribute to healthy or poor self-esteem, when we think about healthy self-esteem, it's about experiencing success, okay? It's about being spoken to respectively, being listened to, and having trustworthy friends or people around you who you trust, okay? If you have experiences of continuous failure or things not working or, just not being good enough at something, or being criticized either by other people or, how, again, that inner voice of how do you talk to yourself of like, God, I'm so dumb. Like, why did I say that? Or like, God, I'm, after this talk today, I'll walk out and I'm like, oh, I can't believe I said that. But it's that inner critic that, it crops up for everyone, but it's how much of a role that is having on how you feel about yourself. Being bullied or made fun of, intentionally or unintentionally. Sometimes people are just not nice and they will say something without thinking, and they're not intentionally doing it, but damn, it really, really hurts. And then there's other examples where actually people are just really mean and that's a whole other kettle of fish kind of thing. And just being ignored. Again, I've spoken to so many young people where they're like, God, I wish someone would just see me and not just my chair. Like, just talk to me. I'm here. Like, I can hear you. I can speak for myself. But again, if you're continuously ignored, it's about those experiences of how that makes you feel about yourself, okay? And again, James's talk next door, Dr. Poisky's talk next door, if we think of it from experience success, school is a good example where actually we know a lot of times we can either be really, really good at school or there's just going to be certain things that don't work for us. And then it's how you get that feedback from your teachers, from your parents, from, again, just internalizing everything, taking it into yourself. Do you want to go?
Okay.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Okay.
Just check time for us as well. 12:30.
Yeah, that's good. And just thinking about that last slide about the successes as well. If I just go back there, experiencing successes, and I think that's something, so many of these factors on here, probably something which other people around the person who has Duchenne can do a lot to support with as well. And the experiencing successes, like even when you're at your multidisciplinary assessments, when you're coming into your clinics or with school settings as well, how, I guess it's also for the health professionals thinking about how can we make it so that this person does have a success, can achieve something. So whether it's with a physiotherapist or occupational therapist, if they have that input, But and starting to the idea of when our young men may need to start using a wheelchair, thinking of that, the choice to, or the option to use the wheelchair, it's going to enable them to have those, sorry, I'm mumbling, the experience when the person who's introducing them to using the wheelchair, like maybe setting up the task of this is something that is going to enable them to be able to do more things that they'd like to be doing. So seeing it as a positive outcome so that they can have a positive sort of experience from that. So I think there's a lot that other people around the person can help with as well. But yes, so moving on to some of the strategies or ways that generally can help increase self-esteem and confidence. A key thing really is, and this is a lot of work that we do with anybody that we're working with, can be really helping them understand what it is that's really important to them. So it's not what's important to, Joe, who I sit next to in the classroom, or Billy, who I work with, but it's what's important to you. And we call this your values. So this is something we probably don't really think about too much, but once we understand what it is that's really important to me, that can really help steer us and direct us for goals in the future. So even if so somebody who may potentially like gardening as a creative skill, they enjoy doing their gardening, and they may have been planting bulbs or planting cress seeds, in the past. Then when they're, it might be like with years going ahead, they might find that they're unable to actually do the physical planting themselves, but how can I still get this, meet this need of being, or this value of being creative? I might use some software to design something in the garden. And then also following that, it might be that actually I'm directing somebody about where to plant these things. So if my value is being creative or enjoying gardening, it's how can I still meet that need, but setting the goals in a different way. I hope that makes sense. And each time you do achieve a goal, we know that that's something that can give you that real sense of confidence. On the right, there are some examples of values. I mean, the values, it's very varied, it's very individual. These are just some, being respectful. So that might be being respectful to myself, being respectful to others. Self-care. So if it's really important for me to look after myself, like my own health needs, and that it might come into that sort of being assertive, because it's really important for me to get the right help that I need at the right moment. Other ways of increasing self-esteem, confidence. Is this on to you? We're switching around.
Yeah, double team it. So trying things out, easier said than done. But basically, it's getting used to feeling uncomfortable, because it is a lot easier for us to kind of stay doing the same things because that feels quite safe, but then that's not how we learn, okay? And it's about getting that balance of, right, what's a comfortable level of uncomfortableness, of basically, what is it, like Linda was saying, that is important to me, okay? So for me, like example, I like a challenge. That's one of my values. I like being challenged. Talking to a room full of people who know way more about Duchenne than I do is a challenge, okay? But I enjoy doing this. I'm going to have a buzz after this, all right? But it's trying things out, all right? It'd be much easier for me to kind of just be like, oh, actually, I'm really busy today. I'm not going to do that. But then I'm not going to learn, okay? And I'm not going to get to meet new people, which is also something that's really, really valued to me, okay? So it's the kind of trying things out and then, building your confidence that way. And then having beginner expectations of when we first do something, we're not going to be good at it. If we think of it back to the developmental stages, where your little toddlers and stuff learning to walk, that never goes well to start with, but you have to start building the skill up, okay? And part of it is using practical coping strategies. So there might be certain things, I meet a lot of young people who like to take a certain thing with them. These are a really good example of coping strategies that sometimes crop up in social situations where a phone comes out, because I'm still listening, but I'm just like, it's not as intense of having to look at you directly. But it's that idea as well of also having, being able to practice certain things. We know sometimes it can be difficult to relax, just slowing down. Things like, okay, right, just have a breath. Like just those kind of things of when it feels a bit uncomfortable, that we're still doing something that's challenging, but we're just learning how to manage that a little bit. And sometimes when we first start out, we might need other people around us to help learn and do stuff. But also it's about, as potentially parents and caregivers as well, of when we think back to the increase in independence and autonomy and stuff, of being able to take a step back and letting your son make mistakes as well, the same as anyone else, okay? And that can also feel a little bit scary sometimes, because we're like, oh, well, what if this happens? Or they do get upset, or someone does, get really frustrated about something that's happened, or someone is mean to someone, okay? And it's again, that is life skills and life development, of you then work with your young person to kind of be like, oh, well, do you know what, that was rubbish. Didn't work the way we thought it would work. What can we do differently the next time? So it's about trying things out to try and help, just increase the self-esteem of like not always needing someone to do it for you as well. Again, the clinical appointment's a good one of like testing it out, of just getting to speak a bit more to like your, doctors or physios or whatever, but also social situations, which we know that can be trickier when you have Duchenne as well, to actually sit in a social situation and get the best version of yourself out there. Yep, I'll just keep going.
So another strategy really for helping improve or develop self-confidence is what we think about as self-acceptance. So I guess all of us, we don't always feel great or good about ourselves all of the time. There'll be times when we're not feeling so good. And I like to think of ourselves as made up of multiple sort of different selves in a way. So there might be a self that might be not particularly confident in particular settings, but actually I might be very good at doing some other things. So if we think of it, it might be somebody who might be a little bit sort of anxious about talking. A lot of the people that I work with, it's around talking to new people, and some social anxiety in adulthood is something that quite commonly crops up. So it might be that actually somebody thinks, actually, a part of me that I am really good at is being a listener, or something that I'm really good at is being sort of really persevering, keeping going on tasks, or other things that I am really good at, sort of being creative. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that it's not just the one part to everyone, that they see that kind of encompasses the whole of themselves. And also there will be times when, as Chloe was saying, things don't quite go the way you want them to have done, or you may have not quite behaved how you set in your mind to before you went into a situation. But that's okay. We're all human. We all do sort of have these times when we're sort of making mistakes or do things not quite the way we would have liked it to have turned out. So it's about accepting ourselves with our flaws as well. Making mistakes. Gosh, I coming here last night, I was at work yesterday, long drive to get here. I certainly made a few mistakes in my packing. There's a couple of things that I definitely found this morning that I left behind. So what will I learn from that? Next time, I'll allow myself a bit more time. I'll make a list. So, we all make mistakes. Really important as well, avoiding these global labels. If somebody's gone into a situation, I'll use a social situation again, and thought that it didn't go as well as they wanted it to beforehand, and then they come away and may think, oh gosh, that was terrible, I was just such a failure, that just was awful, and then they're dwelling on that when something goes wrong. But hold on, that's only a part of you. What about the rest of you? That's a really good friend, somebody who's really creative, or is really doing excellent IT work that I wouldn't have an absolute clue about, or many of us perhaps. So again, just noticing, it might be that, so next time maybe I'll just try and speak to one person rather than going into a group of people. But actually I might struggle sometimes in doing these things, but actually there's all these other things that I'm really great at doing. So that's part of the helpful self-talk. An example, nobody gets things right all the time. Next time I'll try such and such. Okay. And I'll continue with another way I mentioned earlier about that, so both Chloe and I have, about the language that we use when we're talking to ourselves. Again, this is really important, because sometimes it's kind of the tone of what we're saying as well as sort of the language, the things that we're saying to ourselves. If we're sort of being really quite critical, going, I'm just so stupid, how could I possibly have got that wrong? How would it be if instead, so when we're talking to ourselves, it's more kind, compassionate, encouraging, thinking, oh, you know, I struggled on that occasion, but that's okay. You know, next time I'll try something a bit differently. That didn't go so, but again, you know, putting it in perspective, that didn't go so well, but, you know, next time I'll do these various other strategies or try things in a different way. And the tone of the voice. You know, if you think how many of us, when we're talking to somebody else who's struggling, how, you know, what's the tone of your voice like? How do you respond to somebody else when you notice that they're having a difficult time? I bet most of us would probably be more sort of encouraging and kind to other people. So the idea is to try and turn that in on yourself if you're finding that you're having, you know, in those difficult moments. I mean, some of these skills as well, you know, the noticing sort of how, the kind of the content of our thoughts, and the part about the challenging those critical thoughts. This is something that, you know, it's something that often people who come to see, say, a health professional, a psychologist, counsellor, sometimes it can be more helpful to have somebody helping you unpick or understand and notice and keep track of and then challenge those thoughts. We've put it on here, but I think the challenging part might be something that for people who are struggling a bit more, it might be an indication to try and get some additional help to help with that, because it can be difficult to sort of notice and make these changes yourself sometimes. Yeah, and I guess just this role of the, you know, when we are critical, part of it is the reason why, you know, why people tend to be critical is that there is a motivating component generally. You know, if I'm kind of telling myself, oh, I'll do better next time. But if we're criticising ourselves all the time, it doesn't really motivate you to do better, because it can just make people avoid more. So if you're really setting yourself up, like really badly criticising that, oh, you're stupid, you can never do anything right, it's potentially then going to lead to people avoiding, and then having fewer opportunities to build confidence and build their self-esteem. Okay, so, and just leading on to, this is just an example of, you know, we call them sort of thinking traps that people might get into. So, for, you know, somebody already might have some low self-esteem, low confidence, and then if they have an experience that can be is disappointing, it didn't quite go as they wanted to, can lead on to affecting how they feel about themselves. Following that, they might then start predicting about, oh, if I go into that situation in future, I'm going to fail, it's going to be negative. So they become discouraged in trying. And then, again, sort of leading on to these, we could say, disappointing outcomes. And just as an example to sort of help understand it perhaps a bit more. So somebody who has sort of low self-esteem, they have that kind of inner critical voice, you know, you're going to fail, I doubt myself. The experience might be that actually socially, when I went into this situation, I did clam up when somebody spoke to me and I walked away. How that's going to make them feel afterwards is I feel stupid, look, I'm rubbish at conversation, see, you know. And then in future, I'm going to perhaps avoid, because I know that I think if anyone speaks to me, I'm just going to freeze up. That's predicting what's going to happen in future occurrences. So then that discouragement. So actually, it's better if I just don't go out. I just best keep myself to myself so I don't feel that uncomfortable and bad feeling again. But the downside of that is it reduces those opportunities, you know, to meet people. Person might become more socially isolated and lonely. So this is, you know, just hopefully sort of helping understand a bit about why it's really helpful to start noticing sort of that inner voice, that inner critical voice, and doing something about it so we don't try and fall into these kind of traps. Okay.
I'm just mindful of time because it is pre-lunch, so that's also very important. And it would be good to get some questions, but obviously we will be floating around today and tomorrow as well. So like you can catch us if we don't get to everyone. But other ways of increasing self-esteem and confidence is we talk a lot about assertiveness skills. So we start doing this actually probably from around early teens, if not a bit younger, all the way into adulthood, of how do you get your point of view across, and how do you stand up for yourself while respecting the rights of others. So this can sometimes be a bit tricky. So one of the things, particularly working with teenagers with Duchenne, is one of the strengths is definitely honesty. So I've learned not to be offended by things very easily, because sometimes, you know, someone can be quite direct, which is great. But it's about actually the social skills side of things, of getting the balance. So at the bottom, it might be a little bit unclear, but there's a little bit of what we call passive, so it's a bit trickier to get your view across. You're not going to say something. It's about being assertive, which is getting the balance of being direct, but being able to also take other people's point of view. And then sometimes what might be viewed as aggressive or sometimes rude as well, of like being very, very direct with certain things. But the big thing we do kind of focus on is asking for help when you need it. Okay, but asking for help where it doesn't feel like you have to wait for a long time for it, or, you know, if you don't want to do something, being able to do that as well. So sometimes in sessions, and this can be, you know, encouraged by people around you, of how do you get your point across, but sometimes it might need a bit of more direct one-to-one work from a mental health professional of how do you develop those skills. So when we think of that, then, you know, you don't, again, it's a lot to kind of think about. So as an individual, you can do kind of self-help materials, okay? If you've got that kind of, you know, being a tech whiz and able to go online, there's loads of videos and self-help talks and things like that. There are, you know, more online kind of telephone or chat lines, things like that. There are groups that are run, obviously, by different family charities and organisations. You know, Pathfinder's fantastic. And then thinking of, like, you know, actually, if you do need a bit of that extra support from a therapy point of view, very aware there's challenges to getting access to psychological support, but, you know, sometimes it does need a bit more than just, you know, lower level self-help type things, and you might need a bit of extra support from a mental health professional, okay? So there are just some kind of possible options at the moment. And then just giving some general acknowledgements of, you know, as part of the DMD Care UK project for the psychosocial side, of just everyone who's here today listening and contributing at different points across the project, funders, the project team, and, you know, our young people and adults with Duchenne as well. Any thoughts or questions? I was told to mention there is a microphone, so if anyone does have a question or a thought, just wait for the microphone. Otherwise, yeah, we can catch people afterwards if you want to go grab food. Happy either way. We've got time, so it's up to you guys.
Hi, sometimes I struggle a lot with my mental health, and I've been depressed, I've had suicidal thoughts and massive mood swings, and I've been to the doctor and put us on antidepressants, and then sent me on my way.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering how I actually do go about getting a therapy, or what that even look like.
Yeah, so this is one thing, it will depend a little bit on where you live. Thank you for sharing that, by the way. It does depend on where you live sometimes. So obviously being more in the adult range, Linda will tend to have a bit more information of who to access. A lot of the times, if it ends up going through your GP, it will be a referral to something like talking therapies, which, you know, it can be online, it can be fantastic, it tends to be short levels of sessions. Ideally, it could be someone who works within the physical health kind of area, so health psychology, so some local hospitals, like whoever your main care team are, might be able to have access to health psychology. But it might be worth having a chat afterwards so we could get a bit more of that information and maybe guide you on where you might need to go, if that makes sense. But I don't know if you've got anything else, Linda.
Oh, yeah, we could definitely have a chat afterwards. The one-to-one talking therapy services that are for adults is across the UK. It's like a national, it's under umbrella improving access to talking therapies. And every GP practice will be linked in with these services, but people can self-refer as well. And these are free NHS talking therapies. And a lot of the kind of the work that they do, as we were saying earlier about sort of self-esteem and sort of depression as well, and anxiety, a lot of sort of psychological work is similar with when people have sort of physical disabilities to when they don't. But it's just that the therapist, I think it's helpful if the health professional, as Chloe mentioned, has some understanding of physical health conditions too. And these services, the NHS talking therapies, they do now work more with people with long-term health conditions as well. So that may be a good place to start. But we can have a chat more after.
Hi, Robert. This is Darren. This is my husband. He's a psychotherapist. So if you do need any help, just ask. We do have some cards for you today as well, so we can leave that with you. Okay.
Hi, I'm Rob's carer. I've been working with Rob for around 14 years. This is quite a taboo subject, I find, and some people are quite uncomfortable with it. I'm not talking about Rob, I'm talking about gentlemen as a whole, about sexual desires and that relief. And if there's any help out there for them to get that support as a normal man, you know, to AIDS and that sort of thing, to you know, in my opinion, it has a massive effect on mental health. You know, because intimate relationships are quite difficult when you've got a disability like Duchenne. Is there anything out there for these gentlemen?
I'll probably ask Chloe, who knows a bit more, I think, at the moment. I know there was a really helpful talk here last year about it, and I think you're absolutely right. I think it's an area that it's not probably spoken about as much, and so I don't have any recommendations right now. I appreciate absolutely that it's an issue for many of our men. Did you want to?
Oh, no, sorry, I wasn't sure if you knew about the lady behind. I wasn't sure. Yeah, sorry. I know there's ongoing work, so that it's the difference, isn't it, between the academic researchy work that's happening of like doing more focus groups on it being an issue, because we know it's something that for a lot of our adults with Duchenne and teenagers as well isn't spoken about. Even in clinics, it's not asked at all. And there are some work from some professionals and stuff about starting to get hopefully some groups running and things like that of like, it's a work in progress, but if you have someone who individually you're able to speak to, it's something that you're able to explore and then can again direct more to practical kind of recommendations and more local groups as well. But yeah, so it's definitely a work in progress area. Was there, Kathy, sorry?
I was just going to say, I think other countries are better at doing this kind of thing than the UK, so it might be worth looking at. I know there's a project in Italy, and I think they're quite good in the Netherlands as well. But
Thank you. Sorry, it's probably partly. I'm coordinating the DMD Care UK project. And I'm just aware, of things going on in other countries that I can try and get some information about projects together and give you links to it, because, I mean, we're bad in the UK about talking about sex and relationships anyway. And if we can look at what's happening in other countries where they're doing it a bit better and try and learn from that. Absolutely, yeah.
Men need to know that it's normal.
Yeah,
it's fine,
yeah.
You know?
And teenage, boys going, we are doing, we're doing some work at the moment about preparing, and I know this is a much younger age group, but preparing boys for testosterone treatment and pubertal assessment, because that's another thing that, preparing boys for that intimate examination, it's been a taboo subject that people don't like to talk about, so that's an area we're addressing. But yes, I'll try and see what I can find in terms of things in other countries. And
last year, I think it was Pathfinders.
Yeah.
Pathfinders that did I don't know if Robert's a member of Pathfinders, but that was quite an interesting talk, and they were quite responsive, I think, to people trying to contact them about support.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
I went to NIDEX in March, Disability Living Fair.
And there were some people there from a charity who very much focused on sexual health and sexual relationships. I can't remember what they were called. It will come to me later. But it could be worth contacting NIDEX and asking for their list of people. Yeah. Really, really good.
There's just one lady at the back there.
Hi, I'm the mum of Isaac. He has quite significant additional needs emotionally that appear to be physiologically based on not having dystrophin in the brain, including significant difficulties with emotional self-regulation, often feeling threatened when he doesn't, there isn't really a threat, as well as difficulties with information processing. So in a social situation, he'll miss about 40% of what's said, and he'll also feel quite threatened about it. So I'm wondering, I suppose I just wanted to flag that up because I think that's the experience. You know, there's a continuum in Duchenne, and many people experience those additional difficulties. So I suppose my question is, are there any resources that kind of address that? And generally, are there any books or resources that you would recommend?
Yeah, great question. And I think that's, you know, this topic, when we've seen it in an hour, like, oh, how are we going to cover everything in it? And I think that, you know, the bit that particularly Dr. Poisky just spoke about next door around the physiological impact that Duchenne also has on the brain. So things like emotional regulation, planning and organising, even being able to notice what you're thinking is actually really difficult for a lot of people with or without Duchenne, okay? And a lot of the strategies where when we have someone who, when we go back to that slide around basic needs of safety, feeling comfortable, sometimes it is just being able to get someone in a place where they feel like they're able to notice, first of all, what they're feeling and what that looks like for them, the things that work for them to feel a little bit better, and what other people can do to help them just regulate emotions to start with, because you're not going to be able to do any of those strategies on the board we talked about our inner voice and stuff if you're in that fight or flight mode where everything's just like, oh, this is too much for me, I need to go and just calm down. So again, this is what we mean about the self-esteem and self-confidence being so individual, of getting to know a person, first of all, going back to that idea of what's important to them, what's working, what's not working. Is it a case of just really struggling to get into that place where my body's able to relax enough that I can even think about being able to engage fully in a social situation, or what other strategies do I need to do to allow me to do the things that I want to do? And then that's how you slowly kind of build it up that way. And I know there's a lot of more generic kind of emotional regulation strategies online, which then help someone kind of link in, like it's called like zones of regulation and things like that, where you're looking at like a traffic light system. And again, it sounds like it's for young kids of like, oh, green, amber, red, of like, when I'm in the green zone, I'm feeling really good. When I'm feeling yellow, oh, I'm starting to have a wobble. When I'm red, things are really bad. This works for adults as well. It's that kind of keeping it simple of noticing how someone's kind of feeling emotionally and being able to name it. So it's that kind of, those basic strategies. Before you can really do anything cognitive or how you're thinking, you need to get those basic skills of noticing, actually, what is it that I'm feeling? You know, this feeling in my tummy of like, oh, I don't want to eat anything or I can't sleep. Is that because I'm worried about something, or am I really angry? So it's that emotional regulation stuff of having those skills makes the higher level things of being able to engage socially, etc., a lot easier, because you're able to regulate your emotions a bit. But again, really happy to have another chat about other things. I feel like we should bring like a suitcase with different strategies and just like hand them out afterwards of like resources and stuff. But yes, everyone, it's 1:00, just gone past 1 actually. So food time. But yeah, like I said, we're around, so just come and ask us some questions if you need to, okay? Cheers. Thanks everyone.